what fluidity is about. It changes all the time, it morphs. It's never stable. There's always a lot of potential in there that may or may not then, in a specific context, come out. And so this is what suddenly our farming system starts to look like. It's all just a pattern of relation within and between farms or farming system, and they all evolve over time. And there's a lot of things going on at the same time. I think the previous presentation was perfect for that. So here we have these beautiful models, which were wonderful, and they gave us very specific answers about what might not happen. But in the end, in the concluding remarks, it was, well, we don't really quite know what's going to happen anyway. But that's what it is. We don't know. In the end, we don't know. Because our models do not allow us to say such things. So they're very good to capture certain things, which are interesting and important and informative. But in the end, what's going to happen? What advice can I give to a farmer or actors in a farmer system? I don't know. There's only that much I can say. But this is what a farmer or any other actor in that farming system has to deal with. Many things. All of them change all the time. And the important thing is, we don't know where they go to. They just flow out there. We do not know what's going to happen. Which of these paths are going to come together? Which are going to change color? Which are going to divide up? Am I going to have an embracement, a choice to make? I don't know. So how much can I project? How much can I prepare for that? Good question. And this is how we conceptualize change. Also something I think we don't think about enough. This is a classic static comparative approach. So we have a state A that is clearly defined and stable. This is the farm before intervention. And this is the farm after intervention. And we change subsidies, we provide information, we change market rules. That's what we do usually. We don't do power shifts so much as economists. That's more the sociologists, and legislation not so much our thing either. And then, poof, we have state B. And what we are usually very good at is analyzing a static A and analyzing a static B. In the middle, it's a bit of poof magic. It goes there. And the more complex our models, the more difficult we usually find it to actually nail down what actually exactly happened. Yes, good. Well, actually, I don't think so good, because I don't think this is what happens. This is where resilience comes in, and it looks slightly different, but it's the adaptive cycle. Because actually change is probably an ongoing process. There is no static state A or state B. We're changing all the time. So we have growth, which tend to be messy, and this wiggly line is just to indicate that most of the time, most systems seem to be in that exploitation conservation phase. And then a shock happens. And then usually that system that has become very rigid up there collapses, but we could also call it release. I think it's maybe better than collapse, I don't know. And then it reorganizes and a new cycle starts. But it means we're changing all the time, because the only time we have a state that doesn't change is when we're dead. That's it. And in physics, it's absolute zero. That's when nothing moves anymore. And anything that's biological and doesn't move anymore, actually it does move, but there's no life to it, is dead. We're not very good at actually understanding living, changing, evolving system, processes always going on. And the one thing that I said it briefly yesterday that this adaptive cycle is very good at showing is that there are different types of change. There's marginal incremental change, that's what happens on that wiggly line on the way up. And then there's a shock. And usually, I think as economists, we're not very good at predicting shocks. Now, there are very smart economists out there. Very few of them predicted the 2008 shock. Oh, bummer. Bummer, because the impact of that shock were massive. And we're still having a problem with them nowadays because our government is still massively in debt by trying to save what happened back then, which economists, didn't say coming. There are many other things that we don't see coming because they're not our thing. We just discussed Brexit. Well, in my time, Austria joined the EU. Now the UK is leaving the EU. It was a massive change. It was a shock for most people. Yeah, we heard the German case study. It was in Eastern Germany. Yeah, well, that was a shock for everybody. I don't think the farmers there expected to go through reunification. They did it anyway. And I think these things, we're not that old around here. We've had a couple of them. And I'm not talking things like BSE, that we had also price changes. They happen all the time. A farmer usually farms for 30 years. That's roughly a generation. How many of these shocks does he or she have to go through? And I'm not even talking about the private shocks, disease, the death of a spouse, problems with children. These are also shocks that massively affect us. We don't think about them, and I think that's a problem because most farmers have to deal with them and they have to think about them. And here again, another image to try to illustrate the difference between what we do. We're very good at analyzing this. Now, I think this is excessively difficult to do. I can't actually do what this lady is doing, which is absolutely unmoving on a bicycle in the wind. I usually topple very quickly, but we're very good at analyzing that. The only thing I can do is actually move with a bicycle, and I'm actually quite good. But how much of analyzing the forces and whatever's going on here, which is a static, unmoving image, is going to help me in the skills I need to actually ride a bike in motion? I don't know. But we're very good at analyzing static things that we have frozen in time. But again, and I think it's useful, and I think there's many things to be learned from analyzing a static thing that we have artificially frozen in time. But there are many things we do not learn from it, and we do not learn how to flow, how to change, how to move. And if you think about walking, which is what I'm doing all the time, it's a continuous state of disbalance. And I'm constantly correcting for some kind of disbalance, which I actually also initiate myself, because if not, I wouldn't be moving. But that's a fundamentally different thing than analyzing a static thing. So really, if resilience is about change and dealing with change, we need to really make sure that we are aware of our conceptualization of change and the implication of looking at things that tend to be static, mostly because everything that's in motion becomes very complicated to model and to understand and to capture with our methods. And then there's another thing, I said it also briefly yesterday, and it's well known. I mean, this goes back to Knight, really. 1936, predictability of change. And it's really interesting in the paper, a framework paper, it starts in the first page with a quote of Holling, and he talks about uncertainty. And the rest of the thing is all about risk and risk management. Now, risk management is important. I'm not saying it isn't, but we have to think about how much a farmer faces is actually risk. And how much is uncertainty, and how much is the unknown? So how much do we capture when we talk about risk management? Again, I'm not saying it's not important, but we should be aware about how much we leave out, how much we do not capture, how much we don't even think about. And really, I mean, this is a very simple table. It says that we know the outcome for each option, okay, and we know the probability. And if we know both, yes, we have risk. And we have enough cases of risk. Hail would be the classical example. But often enough, we know the outcomes, maybe, but we don't have probabilities. And then we're actually in uncertainty. And that is the very least we do all the time, because to have actually a probability, we need a distribution, and that's many, many cases over many, many years to actually have a distribution. And often enough, we don't actually know the outcomes. There are many more options that could come out, and we have zilch idea about the probability for each outcome. And then we're actually in ignorance. There we go. We don't talk about ignorance because it doesn't work well with science. We're supposed to know things rather than being ignorant about things. But my point here is just let's be aware of what we do when we do risk management. And it's good and it's important. But what do we not do when we focus on risk management? So it's really an invitation to think change differently. Away from a fairly predictable trajectory, which is great because we can make wonderful models and we can see where it's going to go, and we have these things, this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen, and then we prepare for these states, which is also a good exercise. to really see change as an emergent social process. And I do not know where it will lead us because it is emergent and it depends on many things, not least on how we think and how we revisit the past and how the options that we perceive are actually options that become desirable or not. And they emerge. I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, the British farmers after Brexit will probably have new options that they do not know. And the question is, will they be able to recognize them? Because an option is not something that's there, it's something I have to be able to see and recognize and seize. And now the question is that not skills that would be important for our farmers, for our farming system actors to have? So really the question here is, how about jazz? Now I'm not a musician, and coming from Austria I would actually say Mozart is the only way to go, but there you go, why not jazz and why not improvising? And maybe if the point is to strengthen the resilience of farms or farming system actors, we should not just tell them to become best at risk management. It's one part. But maybe they should also learn to improvise better, to recognize chances, opportunities, have the resources and the freedom, and that is one of the things that is there. It's the system reserves. Have the system reserve to actually do something that emerges and seize the opportunities. But by the way, reserves are something that economists do not like at all, because reserves are something that just sit there and they're not productive, so we must use them somehow. And a farmer that does nothing for 10 hours a week is obviously a lazy farmer. I mean, come on, that's 10 hours that you could have productively. But maybe they are productive because maybe she thinks about some new ideas, and these 10 hours a week are something that she could then use for a new venture. But that's not how we think. We need to use all resources efficiently. Very important. Improvisation is also not something that we think about much. We like to plan and we like to give clear answers. This is also a tradition that comes very strongly from our Western mind of seeing the world as controllable. I understand the Eastern world and other societies do not have this fascination with controlling the current situation nor the future. They know that things emerge and we need to be able to go with the waves, roll with the punches, go with the flow, rather than planning and constraining everything. And this is the conceptual options and choices that we really have. And it's our responsibility as researchers to think things differently and then also explore what this different conceptualization will lead to. So are farms really things that produce states and outcomes, all of it beautifully static that they can freeze in time and then measure and assess and understand and model? Or are they actually dynamically unfolding patterns of relations? And what would it imply if we only see relations? How would the world look like if all we saw were relations rather than things? And what does that mean for resilience? Is it about the thing, the farming system, or the farm, and we need to maintain that thing the way it is? Is it about the attributes of that thing? And then we can go there and we measure it and we assess it and it's low and then it is this. And this is not a resilient farming system. And suddenly it's again frozen in time rather than changing and having a lot of potential that may or may not yet be expressed. How about the ability to integrate new things? Change is about letting some things go and integrating new things. Is it about the relationship between the things? Maybe it's not about how a farming system is structured, but how the links are within that farming system. And that is also partially captured in the attribute of tightness of feedback. How tight are they? That's its feedback. This is relations. So it's already there a little bit, so that's interesting. Is it about the ability to change relationships? That's also interesting. How is it about having the actors that we have in a farming system, but them just relating differently would probably very quickly make a different system? And that is adaptability. Or how is it about looking fundamentally differently at the things, rather than stable states, really patterns or relations? So this is where I think that we as researchers also need to be aware sometimes about how many choices we make at the theoretical level, but also then how we operationalize, how we define things, and how we then apply it in a research project. And there is always an ethical dimension. And we need to be aware that the way we define the world is the way we think it is. And many of us work at universities, and that's how we teach people to think. And we have an ethical responsibility about what that means, because this is how we create the world, by teaching students how to think. And necessarily, we will highlight certain aspects, certain constraints, certain possibilities of others. There is no way other than that. We'll have to make choices. But sometimes I would wish we were more transparent about the choices and be aware that, and communicate clearly that we could make them very differently. And that is our ethical responsibility of making it transparent. And that's where the performativity of science should come in. And I don't think we give this enough attention, because we as scientists also contribute to making the world as it is. And by changing our theories and changing our views and how we conceptualize things, we also open up new possibilities. And maybe these would be more resilient, I don't know. Thank you very much.